You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Good. You know, I usually start with something about the weather or something trivial, but today I had something lined up to, talk about a Rocky Mountain High, because we got this big Denver triangle going with our podcast today. And then we saw some news drop, and it's kind of mind blowing. So I'm a little all over the place, but we'll get through it.
Yeah, there's some news. So we're going to tear down, I think, the fourth wall yet again, as we normally do. We're recording a couple weeks in advance, but today is March 3rd. So we're going to talk about some announcement that literally just broke as we're about to hit the record button here. Before we get to that, let's get through a couple other items that we want to get to. So we've got Identiverse, right? They're coming up, and the registration is open. It's going to be June 21st to the 23rd, at least for the in-person event, which is in Denver. And then they have an extended kind of online event as well that I think kind of goes a week past that. You can go to identiverse.com to check that out. I'm still on the fence about being anywhere in person in June, but with the news that there is, apparently enough vaccine supply by May, who knows, right? Maybe it'll make sense. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
I think I'm hoarding all the vaccines for myself. So you might be
true American.
True. Go to Walmart and fill my cart with vaccines.
Let's see. And the other thing that we want to talk about is Identity Management Day. It is April 13th. It is the second Tuesday of April, and is a new global galactic holiday that we're going to be helping celebrate and promoting. So we'll talk about a little bit about that more later, but want to make sure that people don't forget that and take part. But other than that, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for today. His name is Robb Reck. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Ping Identity. And he's going to help us through a few different conversations, including our breaking news, as well as things like Solorigate and cloud security and zero trust. I'm sure, other things as they come to the stream of consciousness. Welcome to the show, Robb.
Glad to be here. And I also complete your triumvirate of Denver connections, as I am here in Denver.
Yeah, there you go. This is the streak that we're on.
I love it.
So, Jim, why don't you talk about the breaking news here, that article that has been briefly scanned as we were about to start here.
Right. And so the headline simply reads that Okta has signed a definitive agreement to acquire Auth0. So those are two of the big hitters in the access management space. Of course, one of the others, Ping Identity, we have Robb Reck on the podcast this week, but it's an interesting, and for me at least, unexpected move within our space, right? I mean, we've been seeing more and more consolidation, but it's not often that you see kind of two of the big fish involved in an acquisition like this. So really think it's interesting. I've been, Jeff, you and I have been involved in a lot of CIAM, customer IAM strategy development of recent, and Auth0 and Okta are usually in that conversation. So to see the two of them kind of coming into one is, well, obviously we don't know all the details yet, right? This is true breaking news. Haven't even had a chance to really fully read the article, but my mind is going a million miles an hour over it. Robb, what's your hot take?
So I think I gotta be careful as a executive for a public company that competes with these. I'll just say that I was surprised, and I'm really interested to see where this goes. I think that they both have interesting strengths, and understanding how they're going to complement each other, I think is obviously what that leadership team is going to put together soon. And I, for one, am interested to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you have competitors that are kind of joining forces and they have similar capabilities, right? I mean, obviously every organization has their own strength and things like that, but what I briefly scanned the article, and it's $6.5 billion in a stock deal. That's a lot of money, or a lot of paper money, I should say. I hope Reddit maybe gets on top of that one and pushes that one to the moon, just like they did with GameStop.
That's like 10 Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, it's like 10 Bitcoin. Or, and you can buy out Tesla, I think, pretty soon with Bitcoin too. So who knows, right?
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Well, Rob, thanks for joining us. Usually we start with, how did you get into InfoSec and, specifically the identity space, but that was kind of breaking news and kind of like, oh, okay, let's talk about that real quick. So let's kind of restart here. So, you're working with Ping right now. How did you get into the InfoSec space and specifically the identity area? Is it something that you chose or did you choose it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm happy to kind of reset the clock. I was a kind of your typical IT guy. Actually, right out of college, I was on a call center helping people make their video games work for Electronic Arts, and followed a path of going from that customer support to desktop support, network engineer. Really call it the 2003 timeframe when Sarbanes-Oxley told all of those public companies that you need to start having controls in place, and you need to be able to prove that you're doing things like access checks and that your systems themselves have appropriate controls on them. That was when I got the opportunity to learn what security was. And I was at a relatively mature company, but they didn't have a security team. They didn't really have anyone doing that type of work at all. And my way was blocked if I wanted to go after becoming the Exchange admin or the Active Directory guy, but the security space was wide open. And I went after it as just my area within IT. And man, I really fell in love with it. It was, especially in the early 2000s, very immature, not a lot of well-known standards to follow. And certainly they weren't being followed very many places when they were there. It just gave me a chance to start being creative within IT. And I really enjoyed that. From that one organization, which was an oil and gas company, I then went to a small company that did, interestingly enough, we did online mentoring for large enterprises. And I got to build a security program to meet the security requirements of the biggest organizations in the world. It's the who's who of the top 100. They're the only people who pay for a mentoring SaaS product, by the way, or at least they were the only ones who did it back then. And they all wanted their employee data to be protected just as well as they did internally. So I got the chance to learn that, and that was really my trial by fire into security. From there, went over to banking, and was the CISO for a couple of different financial institutions. And in 2000, what would the year be? 2015, I met Andre Durand, the CEO and founder of Ping. And Andre was, telling this crazy story about identity becoming more personal and on your device, and how we're going to be using these devices to authenticate into the future. And I'll tell you, he didn't use the words that I'm going to use right now, but he sold the vision of zero trust and getting away from the network as your primary way of instilling trust, and really using those devices to do it. And I, for years, had recognized that my security programs with primarily network-based controls were not very effective. You just had way too many ways around those things, and showing that vision of how we can actually fix it, that got me excited, and that's what made me come to Ping, and just been an amazing run there. I came in 2016. I've been there just over 5 years. And in that time, we were, sold to private equity, and then we went public, and, we've, more than tripled or quadrupled. And we've invested a ton in building out a security practice that's really heavily focused on product security and cloud security. And I've been really blessed to be a part of that for the last 5 years.
All right. So I know we're going to talk IAM, but you mentioned EA and I'm a gamer. So you said you worked as like a CS representative. Is that what I heard?
So I actually worked there for maybe almost 3 years. So yeah, the first job I had was that, like, right out of college, I answered phones and helped you install new sound card drivers because, you couldn't run your PC game. And then, that's not the most ideal job in EA. So shortly after that, I got a job on the testing team. I actually was a tester for a number of games that you'll know. I was a tester on Madden 99 and Madden 2000, on Tiger Woods Golf and The Sims. If you know The Sims, which is now a pretty big online series. I was on the original Sims testing team. A bunch of others I'm not going to be able to remember off the top of my head, but it was way worse than it sounds. I make it sound good because I said a bunch of fun games, but it was a pretty terrible job, and I don't recommend you or your kids ever do that.
It sounds to me like that would kind of ruin video games to some level for some folks.
I've never really played it like I did before. I used to be a pretty big gamer, and since working there, I hardly play at all, and certainly not hours a day like I did before.
I was going to say, Jeff, I think if you had that job, you might never go for a promotion, but it doesn't sound that great after all.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly like my games, and I've been kind of a lifelong video gamer, and that was certainly the heyday, right? When you're kind of in that mid to late 90s and early 2000s. I don't play as much as I used to, but I can certainly remember many a disagreement, let's say, over Madden games and NHL games, and who was the king of the jungle and things like that when it came to who was best at it. So I don't know. I mean, I think I would like to be part of it at some point, but maybe not on the testing side. That does not sound fun to me.
Yeah, I would just say testing a video game is not playing that video game. Like, you got to get those two things separated in your head, because testing is looking for ways to break it, and you don't break it by having a fun time playing it. That those
right.
Those two things don't go together. So that I'll say that. But I will say the best games, and a lot of gamers at the company, the best games are games like NCAA football, the what's it called? The hockey game. I can't remember the name of the hockey game now, but those games were the ones that the best players really enjoyed. So over time, I've really kind of come around to appreciating the purity of those games.
Yeah, it was a fun time. We played a lot of NHL, me and my crew back then, and it was immortalized in the Swingers movie with Vince Vaughn and the whole scene about Roenick and making the guy's head bleed and things like that.
Yes.
But I digress. Right now we went down a video game hole for a second. There's another thing that probably people should be aware of, and that is that you are a fellow podcaster. You've got your own podcast called Colorado Equals Security. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, we do have a podcast. We actually just celebrated our 200th episode. We're weekly, so we just passed 4 years. It's a podcast, but from my perspective, it's really just part of this larger movement that we're trying to amplify the really cool stuff that's happening in Colorado around security. We're a mid-sized state with an oversized tech and security industry, and over time, I was a volunteer for ISSA in town, and we recognized that there's so many cool things going on in the state, but none of us, there's no one place to go find out what they all were. So we decided to create that. Me and another CISO / ex-ISSA volunteer got together and put this together, Alex Wood. And it's been great. Basically, we do like a local roundup of the news of Colorado security for the last week, which, by the way, there's more of than you might expect. And then we also do an interview with a local person. It really is just targeted for those Colorado folks, but anyone who's interested in that, I'm happy to have them come listen.
So, Rob, typically when we talk to a CISO, that person is the top IAM person within their company. Now, you're the CISO at Ping Identity, an identity company. So I'm going to venture to guess that you're probably not the top 1 or 2 people in terms of IAM knowledge within the organization. So am I right? And kind of what is that like for you?
Yeah, it's definitely was humbling. I'll say, and I've been in security now for almost 20 years and IT for significantly longer. And I've always been, at the top person who cared about identity and would have good theories for how we should improve the user experience. And I come to Ping and am I number 300, the 300th best identity person in the company? That might be generous. I don't know. There's just, I don't know if you guys know Brian Campbell and David Waite and Jeremy Miller. These guys, part of creating the standards across the industry. They are, pillars within our company who I go to and ask for advice on how we can get better at practically doing the identity things that Ping helps companies do. It's definitely, there's the good and bad, right? There's the number one I just talked about, that I've got all these amazing resources. But then, every time I want to roll out a new security thing, I get a lot of opinions. Why didn't we do this? There's this new guidance. You can do it this way. And, it's not that I don't appreciate the opinions. It's that I don't have time to respond to 300 people every time we want to make a change and explain why, well, we had to do it this way for this reason. It's definitely an interesting experience and one that I wouldn't trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of helpers. But no, I think you're perfectly positioned though to talk to us about our main topic for today, which is the quote unquote SolarWinds breach, or what a lot of people are calling Solorigate, if I got that right. And we, we've already talked about this, so I know you've got a perspective and kind of, you're looking at this from different angles. Obviously, you're the CISO at a software development firm that also has, you do a lot of your business offering cloud services. But, kind of the first obvious angle is the end game and what we've all heard about Solorigate, which is, the attackers getting into victim companies and taking control of their IDPs, specifically ADFS, to mint tokens and basically impersonate people within the target organization to cloud services that are being federated to. So in other words, to kind of boil this down, is if I was the attacker, I could get into your organization, take over your ADFS system, and then impersonate anyone within your company to your Office 365 or to your Workday. And, so then obviously I'd have access to your email or whatever else was available through those cloud services. So maybe you could take us through the anatomy of that attack. I think I hit it at like a 50,000 foot level, but there's more to it.
Yeah, I think you did a good job summarizing some of the high level stuff, and I think of it from, I don't know, I'm going to say 4 different perspectives that are relevant to me, and I think that they'll be relevant to many of our listeners here. The first thing I think about is the first one you touched on, that any company that creates software that's going to be used by other companies becomes a potential way into those companies. And I work for an organization that's used by some very significant enterprises, and I can imagine a bad guy saying that'd be a good way to get in. So what happened to SolarWinds becoming the back door into their customers is highly important and worth a very significant amount of investment to ensure that my organization and whoever else is listening, that your organizations are also not the back door, the mule into those companies. Then the second element to that's interesting to me is, through this process, there's been some other rumors, and I don't need to get into the specific rumors, but of other companies that may have been maybe even the way into SolarWinds. And whether they were or not, it's not really the point. It's the fact that they could have been, and we all need to be looking at things like tools in our SDLC, in any code pipelines you have, to say, well, how do you know that tool that you're trusting to check that the binary hasn't changed? How do you know that tool itself isn't compromised? And how, each component along the way, you need to have, if you going to the thing we're going to talk about later, you need to have, zero trust in those things that's not appropriately earned, right? Start from the assumption of zero trust, that is. So that's the second area that I've thought a lot about is getting smarter, and how do we make sure we're doing the right things in our code pipelines. The third one is for everyone listening, right? You talked about once the bad guys are in the environment, and to be fair, it doesn't matter if they got in using the SolarWinds vulnerability or if they got in by account takeover or it's an insider threat. The question is, once they're in, what do they do? Well, you talked a little bit about what they did, and I'll break it down into a few points. Number one, they tried to get access to your private signing key. So this is just like security 101. Your private signing key should not just be sitting raw on a file system for your federation server to read it. It should be, in an HSM or some other cryptographically safe environment, and that you can only get to appropriately. And frankly, when it is accessed, there should be some kind of monitoring for how it's accessed and alerting on that. So they got in and they stole the key. Or let's just say you happen to have done a good job putting it in HSM and they couldn't get to the key. Well, what could they do instead? Do they have administrative rights on the box? Well, there was in this situation, folks who had the key protected would see the attacker go onto the box and actually alter the running binary of the federation server. So now they own that binary. They can do whatever they want to with it. And that, of course, is a risk as well that needs to be looked at. Now, how do you do that? Well, once again, traditional security controls, right? Making sure that the right folks only the wrong folks, can't get access to it. And things like file integrity monitoring on those boxes to look for any changes and detect if anything inappropriate happens. And then the last element of that's really interesting is, signals of people standing up new federation servers. And if you're standing up a new federation server, man, that should be aligned in your ticketing system, and we should have alerts in place to let us know that's happening. So a series, those are four different. Oh, sorry, that's three. The fourth one that I have to think about from my perspective is ensuring that I'm doing the right things on my own corporate environment, right? Like all these things we just talked about, it's not just for my customers where I have to help them and ensure our products are configured to make them successful. I also need to make sure internally we're doing the right things and work closely with my partners to do that. And I can say I'm comfortable that we weren't impacted and all that good stuff, but there's always room, and we're always looking to get better.
I mean, the piece with the private signing key, the part that comes to mind, I think probably for most folks, is that seems like ADFS was talked about a lot with this attack, and obviously ADFS is something that a company would be hosting themselves. If they had a cloud-based IDP solution, would this still be an issue?
Well, all you're doing is you're consolidating the risk, right? Which is not to say that that's not better, right? It just depends. But you're taking it from having every individual enterprise having to secure against that to having, one place where the bad guys would go to try and compromise all those signing keys. So yeah, I'd say it doesn't eliminate it, but it certainly changes the risk.
So I find it interesting about the whole DLL modification. And I don't know if enough people know about exactly how that works. Is that something that you could maybe detail a little bit more on?
So I don't have the forensic details on exactly what changes they made. But the intel that was shared on that was that the bad guys are getting in there and changing the running Federation server to one that they had changed some binaries on so that they could make the Federation server issue mint tokens according to their desire versus the traditional path.
Rob, was kind of talking about that the AppSec implications of the development pipeline. What are some of the best practices that maybe, and we won't talk specifically about SolarWinds, but some best practices, some processes that can help prevent something like this? Because I would imagine that if you have the proper checks and balances, you're less likely to fall prey to something like this.
Yeah, I think every step of the way, having good, effective security controls would have stopped this. And you starting off with the SolarWinds impact to SolarWinds' organization customers, if you had SolarWinds sitting on one box in isolation with once the application running on that box was compromised, they couldn't actually get anything. You've just limited the impact of that. Now the problem is SolarWinds is a network monitoring tool that's going to have rights within your organization to see every network segment because it's looking for all your assets across the organization. And many IT organizations, as a result, will not really put least privilege in place. They'll say, hey, it's an IT tool. Let's use this. Maybe sometimes it's even a domain admin account to run it. And once the SolarWinds system itself is backdoored, it's able to get a lot more rights than it needed. And it uses those to pivot internally, right? So having appropriate segmentation. So even if SolarWinds was popped, all they're going to do is be able to see the inventory of your network. Like that's bad enough, but it would have stopped them from being able to pivot over to your AD servers, right? So there's that escalation point, this first and foremost. And then you say, okay, well, let's just say that we did have too high too high an account running SolarWinds, so they're now able to impersonate a domain admin and get onto our Federation server with that. Well, there should be some kind of detective controls in place on that Federation server to stop you from, or not to stop you, but to detect when someone's logging in and what they're doing. And if you have the appropriate monitoring in place, it should raise an alarm that someone's making changes to your system outside of a change control ticket. Good practices in change control and asset management would prevent the vast majority of this. And I think, anyone who's been doing this for a while knows that those are incredibly hard. And it's actually a pretty big ask to have those things done well across your enterprise.
Yeah. So you brought up something that I unfortunately see a lot of, which is that organizations feel like, all right, well, this utility is asking for a very high-powered service account. I think you mentioned domain admins. It just makes me cringe every time I hear it that, potentially we're creating a service account and putting them in the domain admins group. So I would imagine that kind of word to the wise would be, question that, use the least privilege model where possible.
Yeah. And I think it just goes to the posture of, if you don't have a standard up front that says, here's how we are going to provision these new servers when they come in, and security is handing the IT team, this is the way we want you to do it. The IT team is just going to look for the path of least resistance. What's the fastest way to make it work? Well, if I use this domain admin account, it just works, right? I never have any problems. Whereas if I'm using this SolarWinds limited account, man, I keep getting these errors. I'm not getting all the data I need. It's a struggle. So you really have to be proactive in order to fight against that path of least resistance.
Yeah, I think being challenging on those types of questions around, I feel like a lot of this time it comes down to application teams and developers who say, okay, well, here's how we've coded our application. And, they didn't go to the effort of splitting out what permissions they actually need and just say, well, just give me God rights on whatever machine it is, or, whatever system it is, so that our thing will work. And I think challenging that back to software vendors and other folks who are putting things in your environment makes a lot of sense, to make sure that you don't get stuck in this. Well, everyone, if everyone's a domain admin, how are you supposed to protect it? And especially if they're, an application like SolarWinds, where it's doing the things that you want it to do, but trying to detect anomalous behavior might be difficult because of what it's designed to do, just makes it even that much harder.
Yeah. I think that this just goes back to having a level of maturity in your IT program that many companies don't, right? And investing in that. And, my motto for security for years has been, security cannot be any better than the IT organization that it's supporting. And that also goes hand in hand with the architecture of that environment. But if you just try and slap on a mature security program to an immature IT program, you're going to fail miserably, and everyone's going to hate each other along the way.
Yeah. And I think just to pivot a little bit too, I think this is something that we see commonly in the cloud and different infrastructures and platforms as a service, right? Whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, is, a lot of people end up with more permissions that they need there, and can do far more damage than they probably realize, if they know what they're doing. That's something that we see quite a bit with, the folks that we're talking with. I'm just curious if you see and experience that same issue with, some of the things that you're working on.
The lift and shift problem, is that the problem here? Yeah.
That and just too many permissions, right? From Mac, roles are not well defined or well scoped.
Yeah, but I feel like those might actually be the same thing. The lift and shift and the too many permissions, because it is a lack of understanding of the difference between, your traditional data center environment and how, for example, AWS works. And, it's so easy just to say, hey, we're Linux admins. We know how to use our private keys for authentication. Let's just keep doing that, and not really understand how, moving to IAM roles within that environment can increase your security and increase your usability at the same time. And frankly, make it so that when you have turnover, your risk from a stability perspective is a lot better as well, because these folks who have these keys on their laptop, and maybe they took them to their home laptop along the way as well. You get rid of a lot of that risk.
I think with the cloud, that CISOs are experiencing new challenges, not just the cloud, but also with DevOps. It's a ground shift. It's changing the idea of, instead of having, servers, you have these whole new ways of doing infrastructure as code and things like that, using Docker. And what I feel like I'm hearing a lot from CISOs and from, IM folks is, look, we need to remain agile. We need the ability to move fast. CISOs don't want to be the no department, right? They don't want to be the quote unquote progress prevention department. So I kind of feel like developers need to be empowered to kind of, move at the fast pace that they're being demanded to move by the business. And at the same time, information security has to ensure that proper controls are being put in place. And so I'm assuming you kind of deal with some of that as well, right? Obviously, you have to stay on the cutting edge of this technology, but at the same time, You've got so many pieces to secure. What do you think about empowering developers to kind of move forward and providing them with a framework, but letting them have some control over security, and at the same time layering in that watchdog layer?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that earlier comment around architecture. It's making the paved road the secure road, because people want to go down whatever the easiest path is, and they do want it to be secure. Just to be clear, I've never met a developer who wants to release an insecure, low quality product. However, they also need to get out by a certain date. And how do we make sure that we're accomplishing both of those things? Well, it's going to take it's going to take the security team working with whatever architecture team or development team you've got to ensure that the way that's easiest is also the way that's the most secure.
Hey, Rob, since we have a few more minutes, we'd like to talk about zero trust. I love how zero trust has been garnering so much attention. To me, it's about recognizing that breaches can be caused by persons that we typically trust, or people that we think are safe, people who are on the inside of the firewall. What are your thoughts in terms of kind of how organization, or how folks like yourself who manage information security for their organization, how should they be thinking about zero trust and taking what's good from zero trust and applying it to their existing framework?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of zero trust. I briefly mentioned that when I was talking about how I got over to Ping, right? Zero trust is the answer for the question. Okay, well, network-based security doesn't work, so what does? Well, zero trust does work, and I'm really happy to see the positive trend we've seen, especially over 2020 during the pandemic, where people are moving that direction. The foundation of it, and I think you guys, when we were prepping for this, said it really well, that it's just about not having trust just because someone's on my network, right? That's a really nice one sentence summary of what this is about. When you get into actually implementing it, you realize that there's a whole bunch of assumptions and challenges built into that simple sentence that mean you have to go a lot deeper. And as within Ping, as I came on board, we created our own reference architecture for what does zero trust mean to us. And we call it Red Corp. Our logo is red, and it may be a play on Google's Beyond Corp. It's how we envision zero trust working for us. And I think that any company that's serious about this really has to go create their own reference architecture, their own perspective on how you do it. The starting point is, at least the way I look at it, there's three really important keys. Number one, you have to lock down the endpoint you're connecting from. And I get into debates with this internally and externally, but I firmly believe as long as the bad guy owns the endpoint you're connecting from, they can get access. Let me just hypothetically, let's say, hey, I believe we're going to use VDI and they can't get anything. They can't download anything, but I tell you that they're going to be accessing the nuclear launch codes. Well, no, of course that's not okay, right? Because they see the nuclear launch codes or whatever the most secure information in the world is. And all I'm saying is every organization has some data that just seeing is bad enough. So we need to make sure we've locked down the endpoint that we can trust that when it connects, that's not going to cause us too much risk. Second thing is we need to have really robust controls around the resource you're connecting to. And whether you think of that as it's your WAF or it's your application security built into the thing itself, it's your access security, those different elements are a critical point. And then the third point, which is where I play the most, is really this highly robust, intelligent authentication that's, on a risk-based basis says, I have a really high confidence that this is the right person. And this person, based on their role, should have access to this. And because of the activity they've had recently, I'm going to require more or less sign-on. I'm going to require, multiple factors, all these different elements. So those are the three components I think of: endpoint, application security, or resource security, and then the IAM stack. Coming up with your strategy for how do you tier these, for these highest level of sensitivity for my data. Well, you're going to have this much more robust set of controls. We're going to require that it actually be through a VPN because I do want that extra layer, or it's going to be these 4 or 5 other things we can require. And then for maybe the lower level stuff, it could be available with just a username and password. We can choose based on how highly sensitive the information is. Sorry, I talked a little bit there. Let me come back and say one more, just cap it off here with, I think every organization has to go through that exercise themselves to identify what are the most important resources, and then start working on a plan for, how do they roll out zero trust to those most important resources first.
Yeah, you touched on the thing that I was thinking here too, is because we get asked a lot about, zero trust, and well, how do we do it? What's the reference architecture look like for zero trust? I don't think there really is, right? It's more the concepts and the ideas that you have to address, because every organization is going to have different resources, different targets, different acceptable levels of risk, right? All that stuff. And sure, you need probably some technologies, right, to be able to accurately identify users and make sure that you're getting the right signals to be able to make, authentication decisions and things like that. But I think that's, I'm glad you brought up that last point, because I feel like there really isn't a one size fits all, right? It's more the concept, and then taking those concepts and applying it to the infrastructure or the organization that you're trying to protect.
Yeah, I've now had the opportunity, talking to different customers and different friends in the industry to see dozens of different companies' architecture for zero trust, and I've seen a lot of good ones. Probably more than half of them have been pretty good, and none of them have been alike. They've all got their different spin, and I think it's right. I think it's how it should be. Because just like if you ask me what's a good security program look like, I'm going to say, well, it depends on the company. What does a good zero trust strategy look like? Well, it depends on the company. And, Google did such a great service to the industry by publishing their Beyond Trust papers, where they showed the way they did it. And I'll just reiterate the really key point to that from me was they started by saying, what's a workload? And a workload is, a user connecting to a resource. What's a workload that's high risk to us as a company that we want to start with? And let's secure one workload at a time. And, over time, we're going to be able to get entire employees off of the VPN. And that strategy really, really worked well for them. And I think it would work really well for just about any other company that's thinking about doing this as well.
Yeah, Beyond Corporate is a really great concept. And I remember seeing that at Identiverse a few years back, where they were presenting it, and I want to say it was like 2016 or maybe even 2017 or whatever.
Yeah, we had Blaine Zajac came and presented that year. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, I know we're coming towards the end of the time, but I wanted to do a little bit of a lightning round and get your kind of gut feeling. No holds barred responses to a couple things that I hear a lot. Super brief, but user behavior analytics and access management. How do you see those playing out in the IAM space?
So I think it's absolutely the key to success here is knowing what normal looks like and being able to identify bad based on that. And the UEBA, user and entity behavioral analysis, is one side to that, and I think of that as being your authenticated runtime analysis. And the other side to that is the pre-authentication analysis, where we're looking to see, okay, is this coming from a bad IP address? Do we have a pattern of sign-ins from this person that looks malicious? And I think being able to match those two things together, so we go from pre-authentication all the way through your session, is super powerful. But there are things that are thrown in that makes this more difficult. We talked about the trends going to the cloud, and going to the cloud and not having things in your data center. It really does slow. It makes this more difficult. You have to, do you want to make people hairpin back through some kind of system to see it? Anyway, I know you said lightning round, so I'll stop talking.
All right. How about blockchain identity? Where do you see that at the end of this year?
Can I pass?
Sure. I'm still looking for a use case, at least on the enterprise side. I haven't seen a good one yet, but yeah, feel free to.
Yeah, I'll say I think blockchain is a really neat set of technologies that we haven't yet. I haven't seen a lot of things that couldn't have been done just as well in a database.
All right, my last one here is finish this sentence. If I log in and I'm not using MFA, I am what?
You're probably not you. You're probably from a different country. Man, if you're not using MFA to log in, yeah, you're lucky that you're still able to log in. How about that?
I would go with screwed, but that's just me. All right. So, you've been super generous with your time. I do want to talk a little bit about this identity management day that we kind of teased at the top of the show. I mentioned that it's April 13th, the second Tuesday of April. It is a brand new thing. So if you don't feel like you missed out last year, it is something that has been started by the Identity Defined Security Alliance, along with some help from the National Cybersecurity Alliance as well. I think this is probably breaking news. I wasn't sure if you were aware of it, Rob, but there's Identity Management Day, April 13th. Thoughts?
Does that mean we have to sign in more times that day? What do we do to celebrate that day?
We talked about maybe doing a cake on our last episode. I think there's a lot of different ways people can get involved. There are a few different things that you can do. You can go to identitymanagementday.org. They have a brand spanking new website where you can do things like nominate an evangelist of the year, or maybe Rob, right, a podcaster of the year in the IAM space. I mean, I think that would be, something that people might be interested in. You could do, nominate like an org of the year. I know they're looking for content as well for blogging around identity management and, maybe doing a blog or some sort of, video or audio type thing that, they're looking to kind of help publish and highlight the need for IAM. Maybe that's something that, people might be interested in. They can go check that out. Any thoughts on being an evangelist of the year from an IAM perspective?
That's fantastic. I don't think I get to win that. I don't think I've been a good enough evangelist, but I do think that, we do need these kind of days to get people to think about this kind of behind the scenes, pipes in the walls authentication is critical for our success. And we want to make sure that we're getting better. So I appreciate them putting this day together.
Hey, Jeff, last week we celebrated National Pancake Day. I think it begs the question, why isn't there an Identity Management Day, right?
Yeah, and now there is, right? So April 13th. I think we're trying to figure out, what does that look like for us from like a show perspective, and how can we help kind of celebrate that? Because it's always great to get recognition, and I think the more people that are aware of identity and how important it plays in security, I would argue that identity is at the center, hint, hint, when it comes to security and being able to know what you're trying to protect. So I fully support it, and Jim, I think you do too.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is right. It's about raising awareness. We're trying to pull more people into this career field. Like all of information security, there's more demand than there is talent. And identity management is absolutely no exception to that. It's a great place to build a career. And I'm hoping that there's some emphasis on that. It's like, how do we bring more people into this field and get them excited about it and look at it as a great way to build a career? Because there's a not a lack of talent per se, or that's not really, you need experience in this field, right? You build experience by spending many years in the field. And so we have to start bringing new people into the field so that we start building that talent pipeline for the next decade and beyond.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on your show. It's been a real treat to get to know you both.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Rob. And, I think with that, this is probably a good spot. We'll go ahead and leave it for this week. As a reminder, don't forget Identity Management Day. We'll have links to a whole bunch of stuff in our show notes. And we'll have links to Rob's podcast, Colorado Equals Security. Rob, if you're cool with it, we'll put a LinkedIn connection there for you as well. If people want to reach out, are you okay with that?
Absolutely. Always happy to connect with folks. Make sure you put a note in there so I know you're a podcaster, not a salesperson.
not a bot, not someone trying to sell leads or anything like that. Get plenty of those. All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and call it for this week. You can visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com. Got a handy link there as well for Identity Management Day. And you can find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. And with that, thanks, Rob, for joining us. Jim, thanks for your time as well. And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.